Scripture reading tonight is taken from Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. I'll be reading from the New King James Version. It says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men."
Just for the official record, we're still having Friends Day because I know we have some visitors here right now. So again, we say welcome to you if you're visiting with us. We're so glad that you can be with us here in this afternoon service. The story is told about Dr. Evan Kane, the chief surgeon of Kane Summit Hospital in New York City, where he practiced a long time ago for 37 years. It was early in his career, he was ahead of his time, and he began to question the use of general anesthesia for every surgery. He believed that people could recover quickly, more quickly, from using local anesthesia for more minor surgeries. The problem is, nobody else believed this. Nobody believed that you should go under the knife, no matter what type of surgery, without totally being put to sleep. So after a long, tedious search, he finally found a willing subject. It helped that it was a relatively common procedure. It was an operation that Dr. Kane had performed some 4,000 times. It was a simple appendectomy. The patient was prepped, brought into the operating room. The local anesthesia was administered, and as he had always done, Dr. Kane made the incision in the abdomen. He tied off the blood vessels. He found the appendix. He excised it and finished by sewing the incision back up. And to his credit, Dr. Kane proved himself right. Throughout the surgery, the patient felt very little discomfort and was up on his feet the very next afternoon, which was remarkable considering this was the year 1921, when even then an appendectomy would take 6 to 8 days recovery time in the hospital. It was really a milestone in medicine. But what made it particularly noteworthy is that the patient and the doctor were one and the same person. Dr. Kane performed surgery on himself. Now, believe it or not, that's exactly what preaching is all about. It's about trying to get the listener to perform surgery on self. It's about asking people to conduct their own personal, spiritual, exploratory surgery. And that's one of the challenges that I guess of preaching, is to ask people to look within and to consider self. And I'll ask you to do that this afternoon. I realize you've just eaten lunch. I'm a little sleepy too, I admit. And I think it's a little ironic that I say we're going to do surgery right after we ate, because I know you don't have surgery right after you get through eating. I know they usually tell you can't eat for several hours, but that's what we're going to do. And here's what we're really going to talk about. I guess the image gives it away. We're going to talk about the salt that is supposed to be in your system. Now, we just got done eating a fellowship meal. I know you've got some salt in your system. I mean, what good is a fellowship meal if you don't have some corn with a lot of salt in it? You know, some of those good casseroles obviously have salt in it. So I know you've got some salt in your system right now. And this afternoon, what I want to challenge you to do is to explore your saltiness. I want to ask you to look inside of your soul. And our lesson is just simply called How to Stay Salty, because we're supposed to be the salt of the earth. As the verse said just a moment ago, Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth." And so let's explore that for a little while this afternoon. We're going to be talking about our influence. I want to encourage you to look inside, explore self, and see how people see you on the outside. Now, I hesitate to even mention this, but I want you to understand that Jesus himself, he gives the possibility that sometimes you can look really good on the outside, like a whited sepulcher, but you can be full of dead men's bones on the inside. I understand that. Sometimes we can put on airs. Sometimes we can play the role of the hypocrite. And what people may see, they may get a good impression, but it may not be right on the inside. But for the most part, though, if people are going to get the right impression from what they see of you in your good works, by your influence, most of the time you've got to have it right on the inside. Very few people are talented enough to pull it off and to fake it. because it's eventually going to come out. They're faking it. So if you really want people to see God, and if you really want people to see the Lord in you, if you want people to have the right image of a Christian, if you want them to see you the way you want them to see you on the outside, you've got to make sure you understand some things about the inside. And so that's what we're doing this afternoon. We're looking inside to see how people see us on the outside. And as we discuss these three principles from Matthew 5 and verse 13, I think we will also see how we can maintain our saltiness. Because let's face it, we are the salt of the earth. And so how can we continue to be that? How can we continue to maintain? How can we stay salty? The first thing we need to understand if we're going to do that is we've got to be authentic. If you look at the verse that was read just a moment ago, Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth." Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but Jesus says something about our potential in this verse. He says, you have potential. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter your age. Doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter how long you've been a Christian, how short of a time you've been a Christian. When you're a Christian, Jesus says you've got potential. You are the salt of the earth. He's talking about something that's very powerful. Salt is a powerful agent. And so really he pays the Christian a great compliment when he says that we are the salt of the earth. Now I want you to also notice that he points out that there could be a problem with this. He says, "But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned?" He points out that sometimes people who are supposed to be salty lose their saltiness. They lose their flavor. We've all seen it happen. We know it can happen. The person that is faithful, the person that does their very best to serve the Lord, and yet something happens, priorities get out of line, perhaps they get involved in some type of sin, and they lose their saltiness. They lose their influence. It's a sad thing. Jesus points out that it's a problem. And then he also says, if salt loses its flavor, then there's consequences. You might call this punishment. He says, if this happens, then it will be good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled under the foot of men. Now you may say, I don't quite understand what this is supposed to mean. I mean, I've never heard of salt losing its saltiness. I've never heard of salt losing its flavor. And today we probably don't have to worry about that literally, because sodium chloride or table salt, like Morton salt, it hardly ever goes bad. The last time you bought a carton of salt, you brought it home, you filled up your salt shakers, and you used a bunch of salt, and then a little bit later you filled them up again, and eventually, you had to go buy some more salt. We use up salt until it's gone, we go buy some more, and so we hardly ever hear about salt losing its flavor today. It's because it's pure salt. But keep in mind, in New Testament times, that was not the case. They had to go mine salt in a quarry or a pit, similar to how it's done today, obviously, but sometimes they would get some salt that was not pure. And let me give you an opportunity to just guess in your mind what they would do with salt when they mined it and they figured out it wasn't pure. You can look at Matthew 5 and verse 13 and get the answer. When salt loses its saltiness or its flavor, it's good for nothing. But one thing, you can throw it outside on the path and let people walk on it, and guess what it does? It packs down, becomes this hard surface, probably not like a sidewalk necessarily, but that's what you did with salt that lost its flavor. You throw it out and let people stomp on it, let people trample over it, let people walk over it, and you have a hardened path. Just like most people would like a little sidewalk leading to their house. That's what you could do with salt that lost its flavor. So this made sense to the people that originally heard it for sure. It might not make as much sense to us today in its original context, but it made sense to the people that originally heard Jesus say that salt could lose its flavor. And so here's what we've got to get out of this. Here's the reminder for us today, and that is you stay authentic. You stay real. You make sure that you are the real thing. Make sure your life is not a mixture of impurities. Our lives must be uncompromised. They must be pure. They must be salty. Our lives must be authentic. And sometimes you read about this in the Bible as a reminder to make sure you keep your influence powerful. Like in Philippians 2 and verse 15, you may become blameless and harmless, children of God without faults in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you are to shine like lights. And so we've got to keep our influence. Ephesians 4 and verse 24, that you put on the new man which was created in God which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. So it's just a reminder to keep a check on the influence that we have, to look inside. From time to time to do that exploratory spiritual surgery and make sure our influence is what it should be, and to remain authentic. To be real, not to be fake. The second thing we learn from Matthew 5:13 is to be appealing. Anybody here old enough to remember when you played sports and they gave you salt tablets? I see some people. What in the world were they thinking back in those days? Because what does salt do? Makes you thirsty. And, that's kind of defeats the purpose of you want to stay hydrated. And of course, it makes you drink, but then it makes you feel thirsty. And so that's why we, don't do salt tablets anymore. We take in liquids that seem to replenish what we're losing. And so that's the reason they used to do that, but that's the reason we don't do it anymore. Some of you might be feeling a little thirsty right now. I mean, what would be a good lesson without an object here? I brought a glass of water because we just had a church fellowship, and I had some good casserole. But what's a casserole without being a little salty, And what does salt do? It makes you thirsty. And so, you might need a drink of water after you have some salt. And that's the whole purpose of what we're talking about here. Salt makes us thirsty. You ever gone to see a movie and you tried to save that $5, a cup of Coke about this big, you try to save the $5 and you just get the large popcorn instead? You don't even hardly make it through the previews before you're doing what? You're running back to the refreshment stand to get some drink because you're thirsty. That salt makes you thirsty. Now remember, Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth. And so as we make the application, we're reminded that as salt, the impact we're supposed to have on others is to cause them to be thirsty. We are to cause others to thirst for good things, for godly things. The word thirst appears in the Bible 29 times. You know some of them, like Matthew 5 and verse 6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. What does it say? They shall be filled. In John chapter 4, you remember the story when Jesus meets the Samaritan woman. And remember, she had come to Jacob's well to do what? To draw some water. And that was her way of taking care of her family. And beginning in verse 13, this is the interaction that Jesus has. He said to her, whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. In other words, you come to draw water out of this well, that's great. It'll fulfill your thirst for a while, but you will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst, but the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up to everlasting life. And the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water. She says, that I may not thirst nor come here to draw. She quite didn't understand exactly what he was saying. She thought maybe she would never have to come back and draw water from that well. Jesus was teaching her a spiritual principle here, and that is, He is the one that can fulfill our thirstiness. In John 6 and verse 35, He said, I'm the bread of life, and he who comes to me will never hunger, and who believes in me will never thirst. And then in Revelation 7, verse 16, we see that before the throne of God, those who are there before the throne of God, this is the picture of when we get to heaven. It says, they will neither hunger or thirst anymore. So, thirst is something God designed us to have. He wants us to be thirsty people. And He, especially in a spiritual sense, wants us to thirst for Him. He wants us to thirst for God. But it's interesting, though, the way He promotes being thirsty for God is through us, the church. He says, you are the salt of the earth. And so He wants us to be the kind of people that when we live our lives, when people see us living from day to day, that they say, that makes me want to be a Christian. You remember in this same context, back in Matthew chapter 5, we've seen verse 13, you're the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It's good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden underfoot by men. And then He also uses another metaphor here. He says, you are the light of the world. A city is set on a hill, cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it on under a basket, but on a lampstand so that it gives light to all the house. Then he says in verse 16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify the Father who's in heaven. And so our influence is powerful. It should cause others to be thirsty for God. It should cause others to see God, not to be turned away from God. It's even so powerful that it's like leaven. It can have a powerful impact on everybody who's around us. But there is a problem we've got to note, and that problem is when our influence isn't powerful, when we lose our saltiness, then we hurt the Lord's cause. I don't know if you know this or not, but there are some people that are out there. They know you're a Christian, and they're waiting on you to mess up. They're watching for you to mess up. I know their motives aren't right. It's not genuine. It's not the way it ought to be. But they're waiting on you to do something wrong so they can say, aha, I knew that you weren't who you said you were. We met a preacher down in Belize, and he's a good man. He's doing a good job. But we found out that his wife's not a New Testament Christian. And he told some of the people down there, and later I heard the story, he says that she lives her life to watch for when he messes up so she can throw it up in his face. And that just reminds us that people are watching us, and it reminds us that our influence is powerful. And keep in mind, when you keep your saltiness and you have a good impact on people, they might even say bad things about you, but in a kind of ironic twist of things, they'll also, as they say those bad things about you, they'll actually be glorifying God. Because if they're making fun of you for being the Christian that you're supposed to be, then they will in another way be glorifying God. And this is what 1 Peter 2, 11 and 12 really is talking about. Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable to the Gentiles. In other words, make sure your influence is what it ought to be. Why? That they may speak against you as evildoers. They may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. So in other words, when people see you as a Christian, even if they speak out against you because you are a Christian, in an ironic twist, they're doing something good. Even though they're doing something bad and speaking against you, they're promoting the name Christian. And that's what we are supposed to do. We are to promote Christianity by having an appealing influence. Before I leave this, let me issue a warning though. Be careful that your saltiness is not counterproductive to the work of salt. What do I mean by that? The only thing worse than salt with no food with no salt on it is food with too much salt. You ever been there and done that? You can't eat it. It's just too salty. And so, there's something to remember here. Salt's supposed to create a desire. It's supposed to be appealing. But remember, we can behave in such a way when we don't represent Christ the way He should be represented, when we become radical or we become sensational in our outreach or influence, that we can actually do more harm than good. And by that I don't mean don't stand up, don't be the Christian you need to be. I'm not saying sacrifice what you believe is right. I'm just saying that sometimes radical Christianity does more harm than good. Stay faithful and true and focused on what you need to do. Realize that, a protest, realize that going out of our way to try to do right, but at the same time making the church look bad is counterproductive. That's what I'm talking about. Understand that too much salt, being radical with Christianity, can actually turn people away. Remember, we're seed sowers. We're bridge builders. We speak the truth in love. That's the methodology that the Lord wants us to use. Last principle, be applied. What good is salt if it's not applied? Imagine, I know you're not hungry right now, but imagine a big old plate of steaming hot French fries. What's the first thing you want to do when you set a big old plate of steaming hot French fries right before you? You grab that salt. You want to put some salt on it. Imagine that plate of French fries and there's salt, but the salt's not applied. Does it do any good? Does no good whatsoever. And so it's just a simple reminder that our goodness, our influence has to be applied. Our manner of life needs to be constantly critiqued. We need to look at how we live. We need to look at our influence. And we may need to make sure that we're applying that influence where it needs to be applied. The Bible often speaks of our conversation. That doesn't mean what you say in the translations where that word is used. It means your manner of life. It might be translated as conduct. And there is just a reminder all throughout Scripture that we need to analyze our conduct. And we need to make sure that our conduct is such that we're applying Christianity the way it needs to be applied. We're applying our influence the way it needs to be applied. Like Philippians 1:27, only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ. Like in 1 Timothy 4 verse 12, let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in a number of ways there. And then James 3 and verse 13, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. And also remember, people are watching. And therefore, our influence must be applied to all situations. We are told that we are to be holy, even as the one who called us is holy. Be holy in all of your conduct. 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 15. Might not be real pleasant doing spiritual surgery on yourself. But that's really what we have to do. The Bible says we need to test ourselves. And on this day when we've tried to do so much good by reaching out and spreading the gospel to other people, just realize that, a lot of words, a lot of actions, as we extend ourselves to others, those very things can be harmed if we're not the influence that we need to be. So be salty. Keep your saltiness and be real, be authentic. Make sure that you are appealing to people. Are you creating thirst in those who see you and know you're a Christian by the way that you live? And then by all means, always apply your Christianity. It's not something you can bring to church and then on Monday leave at home as you go to work or to school or wherever you're going. Make sure you're applying your Christianity. You can't really make a difference in somebody else's life unless God's made a difference in yours. So tonight, or this afternoon rather, we just ask you, has God really made a difference in your life? Have you given your life to Him? Perhaps if you're not a Christian, right now is the time for you to demonstrate your faith by repenting, confessing the Lord, and being baptized into Christ. Let the Lord make a difference in your life, and then when the Lord makes a difference in your life, you in turn can make a difference in others. Go out and influence and be the person that you need to be so that others can see the Lord living in you. Sometimes we talk about preaching the gospel. I think I said this recently. Preach the gospel at all times, but if necessary, use words. So in other words, just remember, everything you do is evangelism. And make sure your influence is what it is, or what it should be. And if it's not what it should be, if you need to be restored, we want to give you that opportunity. Whatever your case may be, if you need to respond to the invitation, we invite you to do it right now as we stand and as